Mohsen, Milani, I want to move on to another issue at the United Nations, and that is the Iran nuclear deal. President Trump calling that deal an embarrassment and threatening to abandon it, to pull out of it. I guess the big test will come when the United States has to certify whether Iran is complying with the terms of that deal. That happens in a very short while. Is there a chance here that the U.S., that President Trump could sabotage the deal?
Well, President Trump has already declared that he has made up his mind and he's going to announce it soon. I have no idea what he is going to do. However, if he walks away from the Iran nuclear deal, I think it's going to create serious problem for the U.S. internationally. Remember that the Iranian nuclear deal is not a bilateral agreement between Iran and the United States. It's a multilateral agreement that was endorsed and unanimously approved by the United Nations Security Council. Iran agreed with 6 other global powers, including China. And now, if the U.S. decides to walk away from this, it is very clear, at least as of now, that China and Russia will not go along with this. And the Europeans have publicly declared, including the chief negotiator of the European Union, that Iran has complied with all of its obligations under the nuclear provision. And if the U.S. walks away, the Europeans will continue to support that. But in the long run, I am not very sure if the Europeans are going to side with Iran if they have to choose between the United States and Iran.
Right, not from what the Europeans are saying right now. Nathan, as Mohsen points out, this is not a bilateral deal. This is a multilateral deal signed by many countries. I want you to take a listen to what the French President, Emmanuel Macron, had to say. Watch this.
On July 14, 2015, our commitment to the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons was a solid, robust, and verifiable agreement that guarantees that Iran will not acquire nuclear weapons. To denounce it today without proposing anything else would be a serious mistake. Not respecting it would be irresponsible.
So, Nathan, Donald Trump's threat to pull out of that deal not getting much traction with, among other signatories. But if the U.S. does pull out, where does it leave a country like France or indeed the other nations that signed on to this?
I'm glad you played the French president, because he also said, by the way, that it's also clear to him, and France was very, very negative on the Iran deal towards the end. In fact, it nearly fell apart because of French pressure. But he also said that it's clear that the nuclear deal is not enough to contain Iran's regional ambitions and its ballistic missile programs. And this is the problem the Americans have, because when it was being sold as a deal to the American public, the Obama administration kind of promised it wasn't just really about nuclear deal. It was about Iran coming back into the comity of nations, that it was about Iran changing its behavior as Washington wanted to see. That, in US eyes, hasn't happened. So that's why the Trump administration say this deal is embarrassing, to use the Trump's word. Now, that's not to stop the international community from trying to rein in Iran and other levels, and the US have done that with unilateral sanctions. So if they abrogate it, it's just going to create not just tensions between the US and Washington and Tehran, it will also suggest that the international community, especially the US, when it signs deals, especially on nuclear issues, we're thinking of Pyongyang here, may turn around and walk away. So it makes actually talking to Pyongyang and getting a deal much less likely. And it also sends a signal that these hard-won diplomatic victories with a big UN Security Council backing, which is international law, can be tossed out by the biggest power in the world.
But just one point of clarification here, Nathan, and that is, the United States has problems with Iran on other issues, and in fact, as you pointed out a moment ago, has imposed unilateral, at least bilateral sanctions on Iran for that. But it's got nothing to do with the nuclear deal, has it? There's no linkage here.
No, in fact, that's why it succeeded, because negotiating on the narrow, although nuclear Iran potentially is huge, but on that narrow nuclear issue actually meant that it was much more likely to be successful. The US actually from the outset there were some attempts to try and bring things from the outside, from the US Congress, for example, but the Obama administration, along with their international partners, said, no, this is what we're sticking to. And the thing is, Iran has now said that if the US back out, You know, they've suggested, why can't we get our 10 tons of uranium back that's been shipped out of Tehran? So to me, it seems crazy that you have, you know, 3 legs of a stool that you have problems with Iran on: nuclear, its regional ambitions, its ballistic missile technology. If one leg of that stool is stable, why do you want to make it unstable again before you've even looked at the other 2? But you know, domestically and their policy priorities, Iran is a big problem for the US in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. Every side that the US has backed in those countries, Iran seems to be on the other side.
Brian, we've seen no evidence so far that Iran is in violation of any part of that agreement. There's no evidence that we have seen. But what kind of message does it send to the rest of the world if the United States says, we believe that Iran's in violation, we've seen no evidence? It seems very much like the Iraq WMD thing, doesn't it?
Indeed. I mean, it really does, as Nathan said, makes it almost impossible to convince any other negotiating entity that what you agree to with the United States will be upheld by the United States. We can have a new president in 3 years and say, well, I just don't like that old agreement, we'll get rid of it. Or you can have the US Congress, it may not be directly about the nuclear arms deal, but if they're imposing new sanctions on Iran, which they just did by a vote of 419 to 3 in the House and 98 to 2 in the Senate, Iran says those sanctions are outside of compliance with the Iran nuclear arms deal. They say the U.S. is just adding on, creating a pretext about other issues like Iran's missile technology or Iran working regionally in Syria or Iraq or in Lebanon. But from an Iranian point of view, the U.S. is already violating it. If Donald Trump were to take this next step, which I believe he's going to say Iran is outside of compliance, what's going to happen is the French in particular will have a lot of pressure applied to them, Macron in particular, to add new negotiating elements to the already sealed deal. In other words, to say, we don't want to get rid of the deal, but let's add 2 or 3 more measures into it about missile technology, et cetera. That's going to be a bridge too far for Iran. So the effect would be, and I'm not completely convinced that France won't go along with Donald Trump ultimately in taking actions which may not be overtly against the deal, but will be interpreted by Iran to be so on their face against the deal that Iran will start to take other measures.
Yeah, because we're hearing other things as well about Iran not being in compliance with the spirit of the deal.
Yeah, what is the spirit of an agreement that allows Iran to be the most thoroughly, heavily inspected country in the world? We see they're pouring concrete into their formal missile nuclear program, nuclear facilities. I mean, Iran has done a lot, and all that Iran was to get in exchange was the lifting of cruel economic sanctions that were designed to hurt the people of Iran. So from Iran's point of view, what you see is the will, the dominance, the hubris, the arrogance of Washington being exercised once again by a new political player, this time not Obama, it's Donald Trump.
Right. Song, what is China's view on this? China is, of course, a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It's a signatory to the deal. How does China see the threat of a US walkout?
I think I agree with Brian that I believe it is likely Mr. Trump will say Iran is not in compliance with this deal, and I think China believes that will be a very, very dangerous things for the United States to do. And furthermore, I want to add that the Trump administration has already said for 2 times that Iran is in compliance. And how can you say this time Iran is not? And if you can withdraw a kind of agreement with foreign countries on this nuclear deal, how can you convince DPRK that if they reach a kind of deal with America, and anytime in the future a new government or a new leader will withdraw from this kind of deals? I think that will set a very bad example for the world, and people will significantly believe that this U.S. government is not trustable and dependable. And China believes this issue in the future, if United States will withdraw, and even Mr. Trump will try to renegotiate a new deal with Iran, it will be very, very difficult. And the Middle East will be returning back to a very chaotic situation.
Well, you said the key word there, renegotiate. Let me get Mohsen Milani's view on that. What if the United States Mohsen, does get to the point where it, as Brian pointed out, adds elements to the negotiation, adds elements to essentially what is a signed and sealed deal. How is Iran going to respond to that?
Well, let me just clarify something that your guests have referred to already, and that is the reason why President Trump is critical of this deal. It has often been said that Iran is in violation of the spirit of the deal. What they're talking about when they say spirit of the deal is that in the first page of this long agreement, it says two things that usually people forget. Number one, it says that Iran pledges to never, ever develop, build, or acquire a nuclear bomb, ever. The operative word here is ever. The second point that has been misinterpreted and abused by a lot of people who are critical of the deal is that it says that the 7 powers, that is 6+1 plus Iran, they all expect or anticipate that things that the policies of all of these countries are going to change. In other words, it is important to distinguish between the obligations under this agreement and the expectation or the anticipation. The obligations that Iran has had have all been met. And the International Atomic Energy Agency has more than 5 times already confirmed that Iran has followed all provisions of its nuclear agreement. What they're talking about is Iranian behavior in the region. And I have to submit to you, I am sorry, but the Iranian nuclear deal has nothing to do with Iranian behavior in the region. Zero, nothing, zilch. If people are critical of Iranian activities in the region, there is a way we can address it. And the way to address it is exactly what the German Chancellor offered a few weeks ago, and that is to have another multilateral negotiations between Iran and 6+1, right, so that we can address Iranian activities in the region.
Okay. Nathan, I want to get on to one final issue, and that is the speech that was made to the UN General Assembly by the Chinese Foreign Minister, Wang Yi. Let's take a listen to part of what he had to say.
China is an anchor of world peace. Sustained stability in a country with over 1 billion people is an enormous contribution to world peace. Aggression is never in the genes of the Chinese, and acts of colonizing or plundering others are nowhere to be found in China's track record. President Xi has solemnly pledged that no matter how advanced it gets in development, China will never seek hegemony, expansion, or sphere of influence.
So Nathan, 2 phrases stood out for me there. One was China is an anchor of world peace. The other was that China does not seek hegemony or an expansion of sphere or influence. How was that speech received at the UN?
Yeah, well, the UN General Assembly platform, the podium there is a good way for countries to sell themselves. And Wang Yi, just less than a month before the 19th Party Congress, really setting out, Chinese view of itself in the world. And remember, there have been critics about, especially the US, when it comes to Chinese initiatives like the One Belt, One Road, things like that. So that was what Wang Yi was doing. But also Wang Yi was also saying that, China has financed development and helped different countries, especially in Africa and Asia, develop in a totally different way that we've seen from post-colonial powers like the Europeans and the US as well. In fact, I sat down with the foreign minister of Sierra Leone, Dr. Kamara, and asked him how he felt Chinese aid development has helped his country.
It is a type of development that came in a very, very timely manner without protracted negotiations. It helped a lot. And also it addressed the core challenges. And it was also based on community development, because most of China's products are helping to link the country together.
You mean infrastructure?
Infrastructure, energy, bringing energy to the people. You improve water systems to the people. Even when we had the crises, in each one of them, China was there to provide support for the immediate targeted beneficiaries.
Yeah, you know, Sierra Leone obviously went through a civil war, the Ebola crisis, horrible floods and mudslides. And, you know, even though they're not copying China's poverty alleviation method, it's a different way of looking at things than, say, the sort of aid and dependency relationships African countries have had with post-colonial powers in the past. So it's adding to the development discussion here at the United Nations, I can guarantee that.
Thank you, Nathan. And that's where we are going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us.